Ken Clarke, so good to see you. We've got this very important budget coming up. The Chancellor faces a very big hole, 35 billion she's got to fill. She's almost certainly going to have to put up income tax, something that she said she wouldn't do, or that Keir Starmer said he wouldn't do in Labour's manifesto. Is that the right thing to do?
She definitely needs to get it right this time, raise tax properly, cut public spending, and get us out of the debt crisis, which is otherwise going to cause calamity eventually, sometimes during this Parliament. The election promise should never have been given. No responsible party should ever go into 5 years in government when they've no idea what's going to hit them economically or politically, promising that whatever happens, they're never going to raise the taxes, the basic taxes, which raised 70% of their revenue. It was farcical and should have been, and the few people who ever read it should have realised that. Some irks in the office had written it because they realised it would be popular, but that's no guide at all. She now has to act in the national interest, as chancellors always have to do. She's got to do what is necessary to try to get our economy back out of stagnation to growth, low inflation, with people's living standards beginning to improve again. If she can do it within 3 years, that which is the timescale at least she should be looking at, then she might possibly get the government re-elected. It has happened before.
And so, just to be clear, your view is the national interest must trump what you've written in your manifesto.
If you're Chancellor, yes, you shouldn't put stupid things in your manifesto. You should have spotted it if you were Shadow Chancellor and told them not to put such stupid stuff in it, but she probably never read it. But in the first 2 years of Parliament, particularly, when we've no idea what the next election will be like and what it will be about, your job is to get the economy on a solid basis of growth with low inflation. You do, as many chancellors before have had to do, including me, the tough, difficult things that you get over the 2 years before the election. And if the economy is on its feet, well, at least your colleagues can't complain that they're not in with a chance when the next election comes, whatever that turns out to be about.
And you'll have experienced this as Chancellor when I first knew you in the 1990s. When you get panicky people in Downing Street saying, oh, we can't do that, it's going to make us too unpopular, what do you as Chancellor say in those circumstances?
Well, we didn't have this army of irks in Downing Street in my day, I'm glad to say. And my Prime Minister had just unfortunately had to sack my predecessor. I came in the aftermath of Black Wednesday, and so he had his views, but he let me get on with it. And only he knew what I was doing. I didn't talk about it to my other colleagues or anything. And I raised taxation by far more. I increased the tax burden on the country far more than she did, that Rachel Reeves did. Last year I invented some new taxes, passenger tax, insurance premium tax. I raised VAT, but I actually, because I thought in those days income taxes were too high, a rather simple political flourish. At the last moment, I announced a penny reduction in the standard rate of income tax, sat down cheering order papers and thought, these people have not been listening to a word I've been saying for the last hour. But it made us unpopular for a bit, but I delivered a golden legacy to Gordon Brown of growth with lower inflation and the budget surplus paying back debt, which he was able to do in his first year or two. Unfortunately, my party had succeeded in screwing up John Major and the government in every other way, and we got defeated.
And that, I suppose, is what would be worrying Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, which is, as you say, you did very much the tough things. It was a big tax-raising budget. And, of course, the Tories lost heavily to Tony Blair in the next election, and as in your words, you delivered this legacy to Gordon Brown, and that's what they'll be frightened of.
And they got elected because they said they wouldn't change my policies. They would stick to my figures.
I remember it very well.
Which is why we got the last big budget surplus and paid back debt in the early years of Gordon Brown. Now, I think the Keir, if I ever was advising Keir, which I'm sure I never will.
Well, you are now.
I would tell him to look at the Margaret Thatcher, Geoffrey Howe example. Geoffrey Howe's 1981 budget was the most unpopular budget in my political lifetime. Raised taxes, cut public spending, hated by members of the cabinet who didn't all make much secret of the fact, and we collapsed to 20% behind in the opinion polls because we knew that when you raise taxes like that, it's going to be unpopular. And the economy, it was the beginning of a turnaround. The Thatcher government began to give the country a modern economy and in modern industries and attract investment. In 1983, 3 years later, we had an increased majority. Margaret won a staggering majority.
She did, although some would say that was due to the Falklands War. And
They
we're slightly hoping there's not going to be another war of that sort.
I think that's nonsense.
Okay.
The more Falkland War helped. That's the Labour Party's excuse, losing. The Labour Party helped by electing Michael Foot as leader, but the reason we got a staggering majority was the Thatcher government had been the most successful government for a generation in actually putting the economy on its feet, and actually, because of our privatisations and things.
But that was later, the privatisations. That was after 83. That was after 83.
I think Geoffrey's 1981 budget was key. Hated, he was a hated man for the few months after it, but of course he was lucky that all the other circumstances worked globally and everywhere else in international trade. But we were doing the right things, and the results came through in time to get us a resounding majority. Okay. And if you have another budget, just take the example of Rachel Reeves' first budget, another budget like that, and they won't get God knows who will get elected into government at the next election, because that was a catastrophic budget. She raised taxation, but chose staggeringly the wrong tax to do it on employment, and has done terrible things to today's school leavers and new graduates and everybody else who's looking for a job.
And just to be clear, given the limited choices, your view would be, even though actually when you were Chancellor you did the opposite, putting up the basic rate by, let's say, 2 pence in the pound, given the alternatives, that's the right thing to do.
I think that I'd go back to the fuel tax. The fuel tax escalator should have been revived years ago. I will probably look for a bit more, actually. There are quite a lot of anomalies in the taxation system. And then I cut public spending, although there she hasn't got a parliamentary party that will let her do that. What she needs, and what I think the Liberals and the Conservatives ought to offer in the national interest, is to get the Liberals and the Conservatives, I think they should offer to help her get in the reductions in public spending by stopping the explosion in welfare payments, and they should help her get it through. If it had ever been put to the vote, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats should have voted for the modest reductions in welfare payments that she was putting forward before, because the Conservatives and the Liberal Party are well away from office at the moment. They've not much chance of winning overall power in the very near future. In the national interest, you don't want the economy to crash if you're expecting to hope to be in the government of the country. And if the Conservatives and the Liberals, both of whom have a policy of stopping the explosion growth of welfare payment, offered to sit down with Labour, put together a package, help her cut welfare, that would be a great breakthrough in this budget, though we're too near the budget now for that to be done in time, probably.
Now, you were a passionate pro-European, pro-European Union. You will have noticed, therefore, that for the first time, really in years, we're hearing Keir Starmer and in particular Rachel Reeves talking about the extent to which Brexit has damaged the economy, damaged our growth. If you were them, given that there aren't many levers they can pull to get the growth rate up, would you be more aggressively trying to negotiate much better terms with the EU on trade and even possibly contemplating rejoining the European Union?
I think politically you can't rejoin the European Union at the moment. It would cause the same nightmare divisions and crisis as it did before. I do think Brexit played a key part. The party, the Labour Party, keep trying to find a new person to blame, and they've realised they've done enough of blaming it all on the last government. Although the Boris Johnson's government had a great deal to do with where we are, but they are now blaming it all on Brexit.
We're not blaming all of it, but it's a reasonable argument to say that it undermines the growth.
I've been saying it for years. It's doing continuing damage to our economy. This all goes back to the 2008 crash, from which the country has never recovered. And it's been added to by Brexit, which is still doing immense harm, by the COVID problem, by the Russians invading Ukraine, driving up all our fuel prices. That's why we have this hopeless, stagnant economy with too high cost of living increases, inflation.
But if you were them on that basis, would you be trying to get better terms of trade, rejoin the single market, rejoin the customs union?
Yes, I wouldn't rejoin the European Union. I think the time has come where people who share my views, which, as you say, plainly Keir Starmer does, rejoining the customs union and the single market would be a huge, huge advantage to us. And I don't think the public who voted for Brexit actually were voting against a single market and the customs union. Sadly, I think a very high proportion of the public didn't know what the single market and the customs union actually were. And if Keir could acquire some political skills in explaining why we're doing it and the economic advantages, I think actually working towards, and as quickly as possible, getting back into the single market and the customs union is one of the absolutely basic things we should do.
Now, on the show tonight, we have somebody who was, until quite recently, in your party, was a minister, Nadine Dorries. She's joined Reform. Do you understand why Nadine and others from your party have joined with Farage in Reform?
Well, the mood of the public at the moment is that the Conservative Party provided the country with shockingly bad government under Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. The Labour Party is almost as deeply unpopular as the Conservative Party. The mood of the public is angry protest, particularly against the two parties. And they're either voting for right-wing nationalist populists with colourful, attractive leaders, or left-wing populist with colourful, attractive leaders. Now, the left-wing populists, the right-wing populists, they couldn't run a country. They don't have very serious policies. Farage is trying to look statesmanlike and find some policies now because he's worried he might actually have to be in government sometime. But it's
But
protest.
do you have any sympathy with Nadine leaving the Tories?
None whatever, no. But she is slightly somebody who heads off enjoys publicity, and it's presumably some sort of impulse that's taken her in. You'll have to ask Nadine. She does explain frequently why she's done it.
Well, we will.
But I think anybody who has mainstream conservative views like mine and thinks the main purpose of being politics is you think you might make a difference, which in your opinion, because of your opinions, might actually improve the lives of your fellow citizens and make the country a slightly better place, couldn't remotely join Reform or the Green Party in the state it now is and all the rest of it. And it's a sign of the failure of the mainstream political parties. Conservatives, Labour, Liberals haven't made a big enough advance to make a difference. And so we now have just angry protest votes. And that's what the Brexit vote was. We left Europe because of an angry protest vote against the establishment and against immigration.
And then on that, you were in the same cabinet for quite a long time as Michael Heseltine. He recently described Farage and Reform as a sort of throwback to the fascism of the 1930s and Oswald Mosley, and essentially described them as crypto-fascists. Is that something you would agree with?
I don't go for the throwaway. I've never fallen out with anybody over politics, and I don't throw. And Michael didn't do it in a way which was throwing insults in quite the way you say.
Well, he pretty much did, actually. I can show you the speech.
Michael can answer for himself. No,
but you don't agree with that analysis?
I think Farage is a very attractive figure. I got on when I met him. He's got political skills which nobody else has. He's hit the public mood Here's this larger-than-life figure who isn't a conventional politician, and here we can show how angry we are with the parties that try to have policies for government and have governed us traditionally. What that will do to our, if we don't manage to turn around the economy, if we don't manage to get a good, competent government again soon, what that will do to our democracy for the next few years is quite unknown. But then, actually, all forecasting an election 4 years out is always impossible.
It's
anyway.
hard. So I've got a couple of final questions for you. One is, you'll have seen that the BBC is in a spot of bother. Its Director General and its Head of News both resigned, charges of quite serious mistakes being levelled at it. The Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, says that it is institutionally biased. Do you think that's true of the BBC?
Not sure what she means by that. I'm a great fan of the BBC. I mean, it's one of our most important national institutions. Should stay absolutely rooted in the principles and the way it is. I'm totally opposed to Donald Trump. I think it's a disaster for world politics.
So if you were the BBC, presumably what you've just said, you wouldn't pay him a penny in compensation?
No, I wouldn't, but you'll have to probably. He goes for about 15 million usually. I do think that this problem is very serious. We almost are underplaying the seriousness of what the Panorama team did. I think any reputable journalist, any reputable politician would say that to edit a speech, to improve its meaning, so that you give the impression that someone who had been President of the United States and is President now was deliberately inciting a riot and advocating violence, when you know that he wasn't, and you've taken business bits apart, put them together and left out the bit where he told them to go peacefully. That is one of the worst examples of journalist misbehaviour that I've known, more fitting for Russian television than British television. And I'd like to know what's happened to the Panorama team who went in for that deliberate propaganda thing. And my political bias is against Donald Trump, and my overwhelming instincts are in favour of the BBC as we've always had it, as a great national institution.
And just to be clear, I mean, obviously that was a very serious transgression. I couldn't disagree with you on that. It's not quite the same thing as saying, which Kemi Badenoch appears to be saying, that they just have a systematic habit or a systemic pattern of distorting the truth.
Well, Kemi can tell you what she bases that on. All I'm saying is that the BBC should take with the utmost seriousness one of the worst breaches of its standards that I can recall. And because people in this country, including me, don't like Donald Trump, we should not minimise the important bit of this, is that such deliberate distortion of an event should lead, no journalist should survive that. And I would hope that's true of the written press and the media generally. British journalism, we have pretty high standards despite the editorial policy of half the newspapers. But to actually deliberately alter the facts, the speech, what a man said, in order to accuse him of something which he denies, that is the worst possible kind of journalism. And the BBC, the new people have got to look at the BBC, firstly ensure that never happens again, and perhaps have a look at the system to say, how on earth had we drifted into a situation where such a terrible thing was allowed to occur in, of all institutions, the BBC?
Now, final question. Possibly we don't have enough time to properly get into this, but I'm going to put it to you anyway. You made the absolutely accurate observation that the popularity of politicians and indeed parties that define themselves as being in the centre, and in this context let's talk about your party, the Conservative Party, and the Labour Party, is absolutely collapsing, whereas politicians who define themselves further on the right or further on the left is surging. How does how should those in the centre rebuild the confidence of the public?
Well, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have got to get their act together and actually go for the serious work, which Kemi says she's doing, of serious policy work of what we would do if we got into government and start presenting themselves sensibly again. We've never had both the major parties make themselves deeply unpopular at the same time. And people have got, meanwhile, the Liberal Democrats have got to start working out how to take advantage of the situation as well. So that sensible, mainstream politicians who disagree with each other, all of whom are in it for genuine, honest reasons of national interest, put together parties on platforms that can be voted for. I mean, events have done most damage to our political system, but Boris and Liz Truss have a lot to answer for, and the present government, with Rachel Reeves' first government, has put itself right at the bottom of the pit as well. Get your act together. Now, 4 years is long enough. We're now obsessed with opinion polls. Number 10 and everywhere else is full of irks advising everybody what the government should be doing based on tomorrow's opinion polls and what they think the Daily Express will say about it. Forget all that rubbish. We've no idea what events are going to hit us the next vote. We haven't a clue what the next election will look like. It's a complete waste of time. By the time we get to the next election, I hope we have a sensible-looking centre-right party, a sensible-looking centre-left party, and we go back to serious democratic politics.
Do the right thing is what you're saying. Ken Clarke, as always, it's such a treat and a pleasure to see you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.